Elon Musk's Boring Company promises to deliver a high-capacity, low-cost, frequent, driverless and environmentally friendly transportation system, and once and for all, fix traffic. So that begs the question, why hasn't it already been invented? Oh! What? This is the O-Bahn, Adelaide's guided busway, and more than any gadget barn that Elon Musk promises to build, it serves as an effective public transportation system for Adelaide's northeast. It carries upwards 40,000 people per weekday, with the capacity to one day carry many more. While I'll be talking about it a lot in this video, it's not the only form of bus rapid transit that's better than what the Loop promises. BRT is generally the idea that buses should be in their own dedicated right-of-way, come frequently, and provide a level of service that matches the light rail, among many other features that modern bus rapid transit features. Bus rapid transit has really been popping off in North America and other parts of the Western world, primarily as an alternative to light rail, although it's certainly not as competitive as moving large amounts of people. But the obvious answer is it comes at a deeply discounted cost, which above all else makes it most comparable to the Loop system. The Loop, on the other hand, is supposed to be a system of underground tunnels transporting people between stations. It is theoretically a competitor to the subway, but in reality is much more similar to buses than any other form of transportation, which we'll be getting into in this video. Created by Elon Musk some years ago, it was billed as the future of public transportation, but as of yet hasn't seen any implementation outside of one almost complete project. If you want to learn more about the subject, do watch the Do Not Eat 01 episode on it. While it's a bit old, it still contains a lot of useful information on analysing the Loop, and if you have even more time on your hands and like podcasts, watch the Well There's Your Problem podcast episode on it. It is very good and it goes into a lot of detail on the current project, more than I'll be doing in this video. But today I want to talk about why Elon Musk's Loop is less flexible, potentially more expensive, and is not going to replace any mass transportation system. In this video I want to discuss why, although people often say build a train in response to the Loop, I want to talk about a more complex argument for why it is dumb and stupid, rather than the simple argument for why it is dumb and stupid. And above all else, why the Loop is a gadget ban that should not be considered anything else other than a publicity stunt. The Adelaide O-Bahn isn't a gadget barn, or at least it's only a little bit of one, and while in my personal opinion it should one day be replaced by light rail, the O-Bahn is still a very effective public transportation option for Adelaide's northeast, and it proves the Boring Company hasn't innovated in public transport at all. The O-Bahn is basically a busway, and unlike some others, whether they be in Brisbane or Indianapolis, the buses are guided, in a similar way to how vehicles on the Loop are supposed to be driverless, although they currently aren't. All the buses on the O-Bahn are fitted with guide wheels which guide them along a concrete track. These wheels enable the bus driver not to have to steer. These buses enter and exit the busway at different points throughout the northeast. This allows for the buses to make use of existing city streets and go anywhere they damn well please. Something the Boring Company will likely never be able to replicate, at least with its planned driverless vehicle that doesn't seem to have any implementation of being roadworthy at all. That vehicle, by the way, which they don't seem to have invented yet, even if you go onto their website, it still just shows basically Tesla car in the tunnel. So I'm being pretty charitable to the Boring Company when I say they could make this vehicle, because that would actually improve the capacity of their dumb tunnels. After the O-Bahn, the buses go off through the centre of the CBD, even for a little bit in their own dedicated little tunnel and bus lanes. They then spread out to the rest of the city and Adelaide on other routes that enable them to take people wherever they want to go, even outside of the CBD. This means they can make use of existing roads cheaply and efficiently, and also make good use of other bus infrastructure that is designed for buses on other routes. But what about frequency? No one likes waiting for a bus, that's boring and old-fashioned. Like the Boring Company promises to have a vehicle already waiting when you arrive. Well, do I have good news for you, because on the O-Bahn, buses tend to come every few seconds in peak hours, and there's several buses through zones at interchanges per minute. This is all part of the O-Bahn using buses to move a large amount of people very quickly, with limited capacity vehicles. On Adelaide's rail lines, a less than 10-minute frequency in peak is certainly adequate to meet the demands of the same number of commuters, but not when we're using relatively low capacity articulated buses. The O-Bahn fails here too, as there's no reason the O-Bahn should need to come so frequently throughout the morning peak, but it has to carry the amount of demand it sees from South Australian residents. Anyone can tell you the amount of chaos that Grenfell and Curry Street are in the afternoon peak. As everyone waits around at bus stops for their buses to arrive, the city becomes swamped with O-Bahn buses. It is one of the biggest failings of the O-Bahn, and one of the reasons the CBD streets need to be dedicated to buses, and other vehicles need to be removed from Curry and Grenfell Street. The O-Bahn is by no means perfect and can certainly have improvements, but what it already is better than anything the Boring Company has proposed. It moves magnitudes more people than the Boring Company through its Las Vegas loop will currently be able to. The O-Bahn was built in a road reserve that was purchased for a freeway in the 1960s. As an example, you can clearly see where space was left at Grand Junction Road for a freeway interchange, and I'm sure I'll be hearing many arguments from a number of people in the comments later on, as well as many other comments about Elon Musk and stuff, but the simple reality is that most cities already have reserves that they've either planned or they can still use to build major public transport systems. Tunnels should only ever be used in medium-sized cities for public transport in major downtowns, and having public transport be underground for its entire length like the loop eliminates any cost benefits they might have. But the O-Bahn was a completely greenfields project where there was no system before. The O-Bahn is a completely grade-separated system and allows buses to run up to 90 km an hour, and they could further run even faster if the track was in a better condition. The neighbouring Northeast Road only allows vehicles to travel up to 60 km an hour and is swamped by traffic lights, making the O-Bahn one of the best alternatives to public transportation. The O-Bahn is a fast, frequent, and altogether one of the best experiences catching public transport in South Australia. If we get into some real loop criticism hours, we can talk about how the loop really hasn't managed to create any of its original promised features. The only thing it has proved is it can create an underground taxi stand, and maybe it could create a slightly larger underground taxi stand in the future. But the Boring Company so far just promises Teslas and tunnels, and going pretty slowly at that. And I mean, when I went to Sydney and I drove a car through the Cross City Tunnel, I was effectively doing the same thing, wasn't I? Just with more flexibility, I guess. And while I don't want to get into what should have been the right solution for the Las Vegas Convention Centre, I don't think it should have been a low-capacity underground taxi rank at all. But Boring Company fans often bring up cost. After all, subways are expensive, there's no denying that, and it's one of the reasons I've primarily focused on BRT in this episode. But let's talk about the actual system cost. At $55 million for a few miles of tunnel, the Las Vegas Convention Centre could easily have afforded a much better high-capacity bus system. And while there's an argument to be made that economies of scale can certainly reduce the cost in the future, it's still to be seen whether this is actually doable by the Boring Company. If Las Vegas wants a public transport system for the future, it should invest in BRT, although this may not be as flashy or exciting as the underground tunnel with some taxis in it. Let's look at another argument. The loop is often billed as a cheap alternative to other forms of public transportation, chiefly trains. But let's look at a modern BRT system and compare it to the loop. In Indianapolis, their red line cost $95 million. Dividing that by its route length of 20 km, we can estimate that's about $4.75 million per kilometre. To compare this to the loop, we have its total cost of $52 million, and it has 2.7 kilometres of track, and that works out to roughly 19 million American dollars per kilometre. For all the hype around the loop being a cheap alternative to public transportation, the only example we have so far is only done to prove that the loop cannot compete with regular surface transportation. While the red line is certainly a lot cheaper than comparable light rail lines, which can typically run into the hundreds of millions per kilometre, the loop can just not be compared to those because it doesn't even come close to the amount of capacity of a light rail system. The loop in its current iteration has proved it can't even outperform a BRT line, which definitely says a lot about its future potential and capacity. If Indianapolis had instead built a loop system for its public transportation needs, the cost would have likely been about $380 million, based on current estimates, all for a system with less capacity and less flexibility than a traditional BRT system, and no benefits at all of a modern light rail system. The Boring Company has positioned itself as a public transportation option for the future that is personalised, but that only really spells its final fate. Public transportation for personal purposes has always been a failure, whether it be the Morgantown BRT or Heathrow Airport pods. These systems have never really worked. They are extremely inflexible despite their claimed flexibility. They are low capacity, generally expensive to construct, and is not able to move the amount of people required by modern public transportation systems. People have to cry the end of public transportation for at least 70 years, and the loop is no different. Public transportation will not be ended by the loop. It will not be ended by driverless cars. It will not be ended by anything the automotive lobby can come up with to solve traffic congestion. Public transportation is solved by simply more bus lanes, faster and more frequent journeys. And that's the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment, subscribe, etc. If you're an Elon Musk fan who's made it this far into the video, I greatly appreciate your ability to watch all the way through. And I'll see you next time.